I know, it's not a secret. You've seen all the YouTube videos. You've seen quads, flying in the sky, HD video. But you're a beginner, you know it. And you also know you're not going to spend $300+ on a GoPro, but you want to do that freestyle stuff. And so you're scouring the internet, you find Emax, which is supposedly known for beginner level quads. And they have one called the Freestyle. That's what you want, right? Or is it? The Freestyle 2 is not for beginners. And I'm going to tell you why right now. The Tinyhawk Freestyle 2 is not for beginners. The fact that Emax bundled this up in a rated fly kit makes it even more deceiving and convinces even more people that it's a beginner quad, but it is not. And so we're gonna go over the reasons why. First has to do with the motors. So the motors, generally with quads in general, motors are something we do replace after damage. Even with brushless motors, we are going to be replacing them after crashes and things of that nature. But it seems that the delicacy or durability of these motors on this particular quad is pretty dull. And so I've actually replaced 4 motors in less than 200 batteries. Go ahead and leave a comment below if you have the Tinyhawk Freestyle 2 and how often you've been replacing motors or just your thoughts on that. But it seems just that they're more vulnerable than the other quads that I have. I mean, with the newbie drone, tiny 65mm whoop, I've gone through 500+ batteries and I'm still in the same set of 4 motors. And so another thing about the motors is the quality control. So on one of these motors, it did not have heat shrink that connects the portion of the wire to the motor. Generally, not generally, as a rule, with all motors, how they're fabricated is the 3 wires that go into the motor are covered with heat shrink, and that's just a normal thing. But for whatever reason, one of these motors did not have that. And so that made it even more vulnerable to damage during crashes or landings. I just found one of my old motors, 1103, 7000 kV. This is part of the Freestyle 2. So notice what's odd. The heat shrink here is not up to there where it should be. It's way back here. So you can see that this is going to be very delicate. This motor is already broken, so I'm not worried about it, but that's what I'm talking about. How it should be is, I don't know if you could see it here, but the heat shrink right there, let's see if I can point, right there, should be all the way up to the motor. That's the way it should be. But with this one, it is not. You'll see how there's so much space here between here and here. And you might think, oh, maybe it just slid down during some flights. That's possible, but looking at how tight the heat shrink looks, I don't suspect that's the case. I think it was just heat shrunk a little bit too low compared to where it should have been up here. And if you're thinking that you can replace the motors with an aftermarket one, then you may think again, or if you do find one, definitely leave me a comment below because I was not able to find one. So with these motors of this size, 1103s, 7000 kV, that combination is not hard to find. What is hard to find has to do with the number of screws mounting to the motor itself. So of this size, generally you're going to see aftermarket motors that have 4 mounting holes, but this only has 3 mounting holes. So unless you want to start drilling the frame or using a different frame, it's not really replaceable easily. And again, not for beginners. Second reason, apart from the motors, has to do with the UFL connector, or lack of UFL connector. So I'm talking about the antenna. So this is the VTX antenna, this is the RX antenna. Generally with tiny whoops and with toothpicks, we're going to see that the antenna is connected using a UFL connector, which is no different than the snap button of, say, a jacket, where literally the end of the antenna has this gold piece, metal piece, and it snaps into the receiving piece on the board. And that's literally it. You just snap it together. But this, because they soldered it on, it makes it that much more difficult. And so I'm sure you've heard of soldering. It's kind of a big thing with FPV quads. But the soldering job on this is a little bit more difficult. There's 2 solder points, and the thing with these antennas is that the antenna actually consists of 4 layers. So first is going to be the black insulation, and then is going to be the clear silicone or whatever is on there. And beneath that is going to be metal wiring or cabling. And beneath that is going to be the actual antenna or active portion of the antenna. So you're gonna have to go through and peel back all 3 layers before you get to the 4th layer to solder. Not only that, but it needs a grounding point. And so that's the 2nd layer. That's gonna be that silver cable that you need to solder to another point on the board. So a lot of beginners may want to shy away from soldering in general, and even with people who are seasoned in soldering, are going to have a hard time, not necessarily with the soldering portion, but with preparing the antenna. And so it is very, very tiny, and the solder points are also very, very tiny.
I want to show you what a UFL connector looks like. So this here is the UFL connector. So this piece is what snaps onto the similar piece on your flight controller. And for comparison, this is a toothpick. So if you're thinking you can just use a set of wire strippers and strip through the layers of this, that's not going to happen, because you have 3 layers that you need to unravel. And so the first layer, I misspoke earlier, the first layer is going to be this black insulation. The second is going to be this clear silicone or whatever that is. And beneath that, if you look closely, there's a silver piece, and that is not the antenna. Underneath that is the antenna. So that silver piece is what you're going to be grounding, and the active element is going to be the 4th layer inside this antenna. So in order to replace the antenna, you're actually going to buy one of these, and you're going to cut off the end because, again, the Freestyle 2 does not have this gold UFL connector. Okay, so this here is the VTX antenna, this gold portion, and the RX antenna is what's a lot smaller. But it's the same principle where there's 4 layers through this. So I have my old VTX, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at the different layers up close so that you understand what I'm talking about. So here we are with the original VTX and the VX antenna. So here is going to be the grounding point of the active element of the antenna. So this is the 4th layer. The second to last layer is this clear silicone. And then over that is braided metal, which is what you see here. That's grounded here. And then you have the insulation. So again, insulation, grounded, braided metal, clear insulation, and then active antenna element. So this here is the VTX antenna, which is slightly thinner than a toothpick. But as we saw earlier, the RX antenna is significantly thinner than a toothpick, and you have to go through the exact same thing. There's 4 layers to this thing.
And I myself have gone through, I think it took me 2 or 3 tries with the antennas to prepare it before it was ready to solder. In some points I cut too much because you're looking at 4 layers of the tiny, tiny little thing. So UFL connector is non-existent. Most beginners, I would say, would want to spend more time in the air and less time on the bench. And with replacement of motors and lack of UFL connector, it seems like you're going to be spending a lot more time on the bench. Third thing has to do with the VTX, and that is specific to the Tinyhawk Freestyle 2, where there are a huge number of reports, overwhelming reports of VTXs that have prematurely failed. And that's pretty much a rule. So it's not even an argument. The VTX generally, a high percentage of the time, will fail, and you will need to have a replacement or budget replacement, anywhere from $17 to $35 for a VTX, and then you'll need to solder that on. And removing the existing VTX in itself is a bit of a challenge. People who are seasoned in it can do it easily. Those who are not may have a hard time trying to figure out how that works. So you got the motor issue, you got the lack of UFL connector, and then you have the VTX fails prematurely so often. So there are 3 reasons enough where I would say the Freestyle 2 is not for beginners. If you are looking to buy the Freestyle 2 and you're okay with all this, then by all means go for it. I'm not trying to prevent anyone from buying the Freestyle 2. What I just want to do is, I feel like if I knew all these things about the Freestyle 2 before I got it, I'm not sure I would have gotten it. And so you may wonder, if the Freestyle 2 is not for beginners, then who is it for? And so I would say that seasoned people in the hobby would also not be buying the Freestyle 2 because there are just too many other options out there. And like I said, whether you're a beginner, whether you're more seasoned, the motor issue is still there, and the lack of UFL connector is still there, and the VTX issue is still there. So no matter how seasoned you are, those are characteristics of the quad itself that make it vulnerable, and not really for beginners or even seasoned people. A lot of people who buy the Freestyle 2 or who are looking for the Freestyle 2 will compare it to the GEP RC, I believe it's the Phoenix. And so you may want to check that out. I don't have anything necessarily comparable to this to recommend, but just a warning for those of you who are looking at the Freestyle 2 thinking that it is a beginner quad. For those reasons, it is not. So good luck, take care. Leave comments below if you have any questions, or if you had different experiences or just want to comment on how your thoughts are on the Freestyle 2. All right, take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.